Hey there. Growing up as I was writing, either in school or at home with a pencil or a pen, that over time, I would find that there were writing instruments that I just preferred for whatever reason. Sometimes it was because I just liked the flow of the ink, if it was a pen, or maybe I liked the grip or whatever. I mean, there are just pens and pencils that I tended to gravitate to and enjoyed using more than others. We all kind of have our favorite writing instrument. And one of my criticisms, and it's a minor criticism, around e-note taking devices today, is there's all kind of a sameness and a utilitarianism to a lot of the styluses or styli. And there's, I think, an opportunity to be a little bit more artistic. And so, what I'm going to do right now, real quickly, is I'm going to just show you a number of very popular and common styluses that are used today. I think the common themes among these will be fairly obvious. We'll start with the remarkable, and you've got an eraser, you've got a magnet. It has a little bit of a flat edge. That's a popular stylus. Here's one of a few Boox styluses I have. This is the Pro Pen, so it's got an eraser, it has a magnet, and then we've got this is another common Boox stylus, no eraser, but it has a nice kind of groove texture, also has a flat side, as well as a magnet. Here's one of the older styluses from Boox. I don't think they make these anymore. This is the infamous triangle stylus, not a particular favorite of mine. No magnet. I think it had eraser functionality. It's got something at the end here. We've got Amazon right here. Amazon has an eraser functionality. It has a magnet. So there's the Amazon one. We've got Bigme. Bigme is a little bit different stylistically. It has Bluetooth pins. So the device is charged, but it's only charged not for the writing, but for the buttons that you have on the stylus. I'm not sure those are in focus. And then finally, outside of the major manufacturers, one of the popular pens is the Lamni All-Star. And so it's a thicker shaft, which is nice. It has this cap, and then there is the stylus. So for the most part, all these styluses look, black or a dark shade of gray. All these are relatively thin, the Lamni being different. And they all have kind of similar feature sets. Most of them have magnets, which is great. And then a number of them have erasers, and those erasers function differently depending on the device they're being used with. So not a lot of artistic design in these styluses, and they all work fine. Some of these I prefer more than others. I like the Bigme stylus. A lot of people really like the Amazon stylus. The Lamni All-Star is really well regarded. But it seems to me that there's an opportunity to have something with a little bit more style that can function just as well as these other styluses. And so I'm always on the lookout for that. And so this video is about that. About me running across one particular stylus, trying it out, and letting you know what I thought about it. So we're going to start with going to Amazon and looking at the page where I first kind of ran across this stylus. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about the stylus itself, and we'll talk about Nibs, and then I'll share my final thoughts. So it should be kind of fun, a little bit of a different take than my other videos, and hope you enjoy it. All right, let's get into it. So as I was going through Amazon, just kind of looking around, this is the page that popped up, and what kind of piqued my interest is this particular stylus. And right off the bat, based on what we just saw before, you can see that this stylus immediately looks different without being too out there. So it has a nice professional look, but it's not so unusual. And so I just wanted to go through this particular page because there are a few curiosities that are worth noting, if only for entertainment purposes. The first is that you'll notice that it talks about being made with Shibili wood, and you can see that in the color down here. They also make a lighter version with bamboo. So if you're more into a lighter wood color, they have that as well. And we'll scroll down and we'll kind of show you that. But what's interesting about this is that throughout this page, there are actually different references to the wood. There's Shabili, there's another one. Let me pull that up. Yeah, here you can see it says made with natural Shabili wood, and then you have this line that says Sabili wood, which presumably is a typo. And then actually, if you scroll down, they talk about it being made with sapel wood, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Presumably these things are all synonymous. I don't know. Sapel wood is a tree that you can get in Western Africa. And I don't know if the other phrases are synonymous or not. I did some internet searching on it, and Shabili was actually a village in Iran, so I wasn't quite clear where that word came from. It doesn't matter. It's made of wood, so regardless of what the actual name of the wood is, but it's just kind of a curiosity from the web page. Another thing that I found particularly curious, let's see if we can find it here. Oh, here we go. So these 4 points that the website is highlighting as advantages to the Stylus are interesting. Certainly no charging needed. Absolutely. It's a passive capacitive stylus. So there's no charging. That's a pretty valid point to make about the Stylus. But then they make 3 other points. They talk about how there's almost over 4,000 levels of pressure sensitivity. They talk about they've got tilt support and they've got palm rejection listed as benefits of the Stylus. Now, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I'm pretty sure that those are all things that are elements of the technology of the device that you're using. It's not the Stylus that gives you the pressure sensitivity. It's not the Stylus that gives you palm rejection or tiltability. It's the device's screen and its software and that sort of thing. That's where it comes from. Maybe the Stylus doesn't get in the way, I guess, is one way to think of it. But I thought that this was interesting that they would have these as highlights about advantages of using the Stylus. There's nothing about the Stylus that's, as far as I know, that has anything to do with those 3 elements. Those are all about the device. The only thing I could think of is, and you can see this in the, if I scroll up a little bit, in the header, is that they are focusing particularly on Samsung and Remarkable 2. And I can't speak to Samsung, but I certainly know with Remarkable 2, things like the 4,000 levels of pressure, the tilt support, the palm rejection, those are attributes of the Remarkable 2. So maybe they're just trying to tie into that. It's curious marketing, perhaps a little bit deceptive, in my opinion, but I just thought it was worth sharing. Another little item here is you'll notice it says 11.5 grams in weight. My version I weighed at 10 grams. Now that does round to the nearest gram, so it could have been 10.4 or I guess 9.5 or anything like that, but mine actually came in lighter than what's stated here. And I'll talk about the effect of that weight as you're using the Stylus, but just another interesting thing to share. They do share this big table of all the devices that it can work with. I mean, it's a passive Stylus. It'll work with anything that uses that type of Stylus. So really what you need to be concerned about in terms of compatibility is if you have a device that uses an active Stylus, right? And you can tell that's the case because the Stylus needs to be charged. If the Stylus needs to be charged, this would not work for that device. So that's just something to be aware of. So let's scroll down so we can see here's the bamboo one, which you notice is a lighter shade. And then the final thing I'll just point out, it's not relative to their website, but in the comments, there were just 3 comments on the Stylus. And one of them was really strange, not with Remarkable 2. So the person is complimenting the Stylus, but says it didn't work with Remarkable 2, which I thought was really strange. The Remarkable 2 uses a passive Stylus. It's not charged. So why wouldn't this work with it? I happen to have the Remarkable 2, and it works just fine. So I'm not sure what this comment was about, but otherwise the comments are, as few as there are, relatively positive. And then one other thing I'll point out, we'll get to this later, is they do sell their own nibs in 10 pieces, and I'll kind of talk about that as we kind of do the review of the stylus itself. But this is where I came across the stylus and what had piqued my interest and ended up causing me to purchase it and to try it out for myself. Okay, so I did purchase this stylus, and I've had a chance to kind of use it. And here are some images of the packaging and what came in the mail. It's a relatively unassuming packaging. It's perfectly appropriate. You get the stylus, you get a nib, and you get a removal tool. And then here is the stylus itself. It's a nice stylus. It has a nice thickness to it. It is about as thick as the Big Me stylus, and a little bit thicker than most of your book styluses, thicker than Amazon or Remarkable, and not as thick as the Lamney stylus. So that gives you a sense of where it is. As we mentioned with the weight, it's 10 grams. It's really nice to kind of twirl around and kind of play with. You can grip it nicely. It's polished, so you do feel the texture of the wood as you move your finger, but it's not rough or anything that's distracting. It's just a nice tactile feel. It has a flat side to it, which is nice to help with the grip. It presumably helps if you accidentally drop it, won't roll away as far because of that. It is a little more polished. You feel less of the texture on that smooth, flat side than you do the remainder of the stylus. But it's nice. It writes perfectly fine. It's as functional as a stylus as all the other styluses that we have that I showed in the beginning of the video. So it's quite good. In terms of nibs, the nibs are I didn't notice anything different about this particular nib as I was using it. It didn't stand out anymore. I think what seems to drive more about the scratchiness of the nibs or how that comes across is more the device itself. So these nibs seemed perfectly fine, and so if you've got a nice film, you get a nice scratchy sound. No different than the other styluses that I've tried. I don't know how compatible nibs from other companies are with this device. They just eyeballing it looks like it would be compatible, but I didn't actually try to put in other types of nibs. Having said that, this company Nibtou does sell their own nibs. I actually purchased that as well. Came in this nice little box, and you kind of open it up. You see you get 10 nibs, and you get the removal tool. You can pull this out. So that's what the nibs are like. I'll just hold it at the end like that. So nothing big. In terms of price too, both the stylus and the nibs are reasonably priced, and I want to kind of talk about that a little bit. We'll start with the stylus actually, so just kind of going over from most expensive to least expensive. Let me just throw out some of the prices that if you were to purchase a stylus on its own. Like Boox, for example, the Pen 2 Pro comes in at $80. The Supernote Heart of Metal pen, which I have right here, and that's the design is one of the nice things about it, along with the fact that it uses ceramic nibs as opposed to these plastic nibs that wear down. These ceramic nibs never wear down, but it's a more expensive stylus. It's $75. The Lamney All-Star that we showed earlier, you can get it for $48. A standard Supernote pen is $44. Let's see. A popular stylus that I don't have is the Staedtler Norris Jumbo. That's at $36. And the Scribe is at $60. So that gives a sense of what a lot of common styluses cost. So the Nibtou, and we saw this in the Amazon page, is $37. So it's actually right there at one of the cheaper styli on the list, right there with the Norris Jumbo. So that seems pretty good. The nibs are reasonably priced, relatively speaking, and this is where I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here. So just to finish this thought before I do that, this is it came in at about $20 for 10, so you're paying about $2 per nib. So two comments about that. So comment number one, and I'll share this as I kind of go through the different costs. That is a reasonable cost relative to what other people are selling nibs for. So, for example, Big Me sells 5 nibs for $30. That's $6 a nib, which is amazing. But we'll get to that in a second. The Supernote. Now, Supernote, as we mentioned, has those ceramic nibs. Those don't need replacing. But Supernote also partners with Lammy, and therefore they do offer nibs. They sell those at about $5 a nib. I think it's 2 for $10. Then you've got believe it or not, good e-reader. You can go on there. You can get I don't know what the brand is, but you can get 5 for $16. That's a little over $3 per nib. And then Remarkable actually has one of the best deals. You can get 25 for $42. That's roughly $1.70 per nib. So for Nibtou selling 10 for 20 at $2, that's consistent. In fact, and on the cheaper side of what other people are selling them for. I did see one vendor on Amazon that was selling roughly about 55 cents per nib. So that's the range there. Now, my editorial on this is that when I look at a nib and this is a piece of plastic, I'm thinking a dime. That's what I would expect to pay without knowing any of those other prices. 10 cents per nib, and okay, maybe I'll just give you a quarter because and instead we're talking about $2 to or $1.70 to $6 per nib is crazy. So on one hand, the Nibtou nibs are quite cheap relative to what other folks are doing. On the other hand, it's all ridiculously expensive for what you get, and I don't really understand why these nibs are that expensive. So take that for what you will, but relatively speaking, they're reasonably priced nibs. So both the Stylus as well as the nibs are reasonably priced. So as you've noted at this point, I've got a lot of things to complement this thing. It feels really good in the hand. It has a nice design without being too out there. It's perfectly functional. It doesn't cost that much relative to other styluses and nibs. So there's a lot to like about this. And I appreciate this, and I've appreciated using it. The downside of this, well, first off, before we finish off with the nibs, is that what we don't know about those different nibs and those different prices is we don't know how each one wears down over time. So maybe the premium ones last longer, maybe the cheaper ones, you have to replace more often. I don't have any idea about that. So just something to keep in mind when we talk about those prices. Maybe there is a quality element. And certain nibs are a little bit different. Remarkable nibs, I think, are particularly good in accentuating the scratchy sound when you work with a remarkable screen. So there are differences between nibs, and it's all personal preference, unfortunately. So you just have to kind of try them for yourself. But I think these nibs, as far as I can tell, perfectly acceptable, and they work great. I liked writing with it. But the advantage that you have in a number of these other styli and their devices is how well that the manufacturer integrated the stylus with the device. And those two areas, the most obvious, of course, is the eraser functionality and then the magnet. So the eraser functionality isn't a huge gap for me. I mean, to write on a device and then click on the eraser button and erase is not as convenient as, say, using the Big Me stylus and then clicking on the Bluetooth button to erase and then circling, but it's not that far off either. So I don't see that aspect of the eraser button being that big of a disadvantage of using this stylus versus others. You might feel differently about it, but I didn't find it I found it perfectly acceptable to work with the screen menus, and I didn't feel like I was losing a lot. I should point out too that a lot of the eraser functions that I like don't always work consistently. So with the Big Me stylus, sometimes it takes a few presses of that button, especially if you're coming out of a sleep state and it's the first time you're using the Bluetooth functionality since coming out. Sometimes it takes a few times to click that button to get that eraser to work. So it's not always smooth. On a similar fashion, Supernote with their devices has a really nice feature where you can take two fingers and you tap the screen and then you use the stylus to erase. And when that feature works, it's wonderful, but it doesn't work a lot. So it can be a little bit frustrating. So even those styluses or styli that have advantages, or systems that have advantages in erasing, they have downsides too. I think that's part of the reason why I don't mind so much the fact that, okay, I have to tap on the screen to switch to the eraser. It doesn't bother me. And I don't see that as that big of a downside. But the magnet is a huge downside, because the advantage of the magnet is that it allows you to attach it to the device and then transport it without having to worry about transporting two separate things or the stylus falling off. So for example, in the Supernote, the Supernote has a case and has a loop on it. This doesn't fit in the loop. So I would have to carry the stylus separate from the Supernote. Not that I would ever want to use anything other than the ceramic nibs, but in that case, it would have to require me to carry the stylus separately and have two items, which is not convenient. For Boox devices, I tried this with the Tab Ultra C, and so I just stuck it in here and used the keyboard case with the flap, and it did hold it nicely. So that was actually a plus. If I use the Big Me case and I stick it in the flap, it holds it, but it doesn't take much. So for the stylus to fall out if you held it up. So it just depends on your case situation and whether this would fit or not. But for most devices, you probably would have to transport this separately. It wouldn't necessarily work with the case, and that's a pretty big downer. So that is, I would argue, the biggest kind of detraction. If you're using this at home and it's just sitting on the table next to your device, I don't see any particular concern with it, and it's a really nice, and it looks good on the table. It's got a great look. It's great to work with. I like this stylus, but for transport, it's not as convenient as a lot of the styluses that come with these devices and that have a magnetic attachment. So I would argue that's probably the biggest downside. But if you are looking for a stylus that has a little bit more flair, that has kind of a nice feel to it, it's just a little bit, I don't know. I think it's nice to work with a stylus that has some character, that both looks and feels a little bit different, and that's what this Nibtou stylus does. So, do I recommend it? I'm gonna come short of doing a recommendation, but it's not so much as because I have anything against the stylus. It's just that a stylus is such a personal thing. What I like, you may not like, and so I don't know if I would ever actually recommend any stylus to anybody. But what I can say for me personally is I do enjoy the looks and feel of the stylus. It certainly works. I have no problem with the performance. My only significant down is that magnet. So if you're in the same boat and you're looking for another stylus and you have a lot of the same use cases or concerns with working with styluses that I have, then yeah, maybe that stylus might work for you. It's certainly worth considering, in my opinion. So anyway, that is my search for customized styluses will continue because it still remains an area of interest, but this certainly is a nice addition to the family. So I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day.